Let's just suppose for the next several minutes that the year is 1758, and I am on what was then considered the western frontier. The closest settlement would be miles and miles away. I have left the group of hunters that I've come west with to follow up a deer trail in the fresh snow, thinking that I would only be gone for a couple hours. I only took the clothes on my back, my fowler, my shot pouch, powder horn, a tomahawk, and a knife. And I also threw in a tin of charred punk wood into my shot pouch. I followed the deer trail for miles. It had rained right before the snow, and it's kind of crusty and noisy, and the deer have eluded me. I suddenly realized that the day has slipped by and I'm miles and miles from my party. Now I have a decision to make. Do I try to backtrack in the dark hoping I can find my party, or do I spend the night out in the cold? I decide it would be better to find a sheltered place and to spend the night and try to get a fire going rather than wandering around in the dark and in the cold. I find a downed log where I can get behind to shelter myself from the wind. I begin to clear away the snow and debris in the area that I'm going to be spending the night in. Next, I find a good-sized cedar tree, as a good-sized cedar tree would be more protected from the elements underneath. And I take the spine of my knife and I begin to scrape away the bark to try to make me a bird's nest or a tinder bundle. I feel of it to make sure that it is dry enough to catch a spark. I then begin to break away the small dry branches on the underside of the tree, as these small branches make a great fire starter and they have been more protected from the elements underneath the cedar tree. Next, I want to find a standing, dead tree, where I begin to chop into the tree to find the dried wood on the inside. All of this preparation is necessary because fire is key for me surviving the night. After getting some of this dry wood to help get my fire going, I gather more wood and I stack it on the opposite side of the fire from where I'm going to be sitting to be used as a reflector and at the same time to dry it out so I can use it for firewood. Next, it's time to get the fire going. As I mentioned before, all I have along is a tin of char and my flintlock to try to get a fire going in these wet conditions. So first, I take a large chunk of char from my tin and place it in my bird's nest. The smaller pieces of char placed in the pan of my flintlock will be used later to ignite this larger piece in my bird's nest. I have a sharpened stick plugging the touch hole on my flintlock to keep my gun from firing, as I don't want to waste a load and I don't want to alert any enemies that may be within hearing distance. I then place smaller pieces of char into the pan of my flintlock. On the second try, a spark caught, so I added these little chunks of char to the bigger chunk in my tinder bundle and started to blow. As I mentioned before, everything was really wet and damp, and it took a lot of blowing. I blew myself about silly trying to get this going. But finally, after a while, I got some flame and got a fire going. I then added the dry chunks of wood that I had chopped out of the standing dead tree to the fire. As soon as I got my fire going good to where it was self-sustaining, I went out and I began to gather cedar boughs to make myself a mattress where I could sit and lay on to keep myself up off the wet, cold ground. Then it was time to sit down and start drying out any wet feet and clothes and prepare for a long, cold night. Okay guys, several things that I learned from this little video that I made here. Several things, really. I kept stuff to a minimum just because of time and making the video. But first of all, I discovered that cedar bark, even though it was dry for the most part, I had a really hard time getting it going. I added some gunpowder, and I actually had to run off and get some more because the first little pile that I had just smoldered up real quick, and my fire was going out, so I had to go get more. So first lesson would be get you a big tinder bundle to start with. The cedar branches worked fine. They were a little bit damp and kind of had a hard time going. But once they did get going, and I added some of that dry wood that I took out of the upright dead tree. And thank you, Andrew Shook, for that. He has a great video on that. You guys need to go check it out. That worked really good. You got to have some dry stuff to get your fire going. Once you get a fire going, you get some bed of coals, then you're fine. This whole situation, I would have added a lot more of, whether it's weeds or more of the cedar limbs to set on, just to keep me up off the wet ground. I would have built it up quite a bit if I was spending the night here. And just to keep, you might get a little bit damp from the cedar, but it'll keep you up off the ground and off that moist dirt and snow. I think a guy could spend the night here. Probably wouldn't get any sleep because you'd have to be feeding your fire constantly. You'd want a big pile of wood. But it's very interesting, very fun to come out and try these kind of things. You can't learn really from sitting on the couch or sitting behind a computer screen. You got to come out and do it once in a while, and you learn a lot of stuff. I did. But anyway, guys, that's pretty much it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I will do some more similar to this. So anyway, we'll see you next time.